In this video, we're going to talk about glycogenesis/glycogenolysis. So let's get our heads wrapped around the terms. So first of all, glycogenesis is the formation of glycogen, and it goes in the red direction, from glucose to glycogen. Glycogenolysis is the breakdown of glycogen to form glucose, and it goes from glycogen to glucose. And that's what the purple arrows are indicating. So from the top to the bottom. And here glycogenesis is from the bottom to the top. So now we've got our head wrapped around the terms, let's go through the reactions. So glucose becomes glucose 6-phosphate by the enzyme hexokinase in skeletal muscle and glucokinase in the liver, pancreas, and red blood cells, as we know from glycolysis. So an ATP becomes an ADP in this reaction. It's just the same as the first step of glycolysis. And then this glucose 6-phosphate can go to glycolysis, the pentose phosphate pathway, and other pathways in the body. Then the glucose 6-phosphate can become glucose 1-phosphate by the enzyme phosphoglucomutase. And then to become glycogen, this glucose 1-phosphate has to undergo a pretty interesting reaction. So in the process of conversion, a UTP is used, which is a special molecule in the body, kind of like an ATP, but it just has a different name here. And this is through the enzyme UDP glucose pyrophosphorylase. So that's how you get from a UTP to a UDP glucose. And then the UDP glucose can become glycogen by the enzyme glycogen synthase. So we've got a two-step process. We've got the glucose 1-phosphate becoming UDP glucose, which can then go into other pathways. And then we've got the UDP glucose becoming glycogen. So I'll just fix all this up so it's clear for us to see. And the reason it's not written as two separate steps as the other reactions down here are written is just because it's a pretty special reaction, and that's how the chemists have decided to write it. This step, this two-step one from glucose 1-phosphate to glycogen, has some regulation, and so insulin promotes this reaction while glucagon inhibits it. The opposite is true for the other side. Insulin inhibits it and glucagon promotes it. So if you have trouble remembering the regulation, remember one side of the reaction and remember that the opposite is true for the other side. So glycogen becomes glucose 1-phosphate by the enzyme glycogen phosphorylase. Let's talk a little bit more about insulin and glucagon here and their role. So insulin means we lose a phosphate. Insulin, lose a phosphate. That's why I've underlined the L there. And usually this is through a protein phosphatase. So then we have glucagon, which adds a phosphate through usually either a protein kinase A, such as glycogen synthase, or phosphorylase kinase, such as glycogen phosphorylase in this case. So insulin means that we're losing a phosphate and glucagon means we're gaining a phosphate. So that's what's going on here. And that's why we've got the inhibition and promotion on both sides of this reaction being opposite in different ways, because glucagon is promoting the reaction on the left from glycogen to glucose 1-phosphate because it's promoting the addition of a phosphate onto the glycogen. So that's what's happening there. And this, in the light blue box, you should try and use it to help you understand why sometimes insulin is promoting a reaction and why glucagon is inhibiting a reaction, if you're getting a bit confused. So insulin, we lose a phosphate. I also want to note that in this reaction from glycogen to glucose 1-phosphate, a small amount of glucose is being produced as a byproduct. So it can go straight to glucose from this stage, but only a small amount. But for the rest of it, we have to keep going. So glucose 1-phosphate to glucose 6-phosphate, it's again by the same enzyme, phosphoglucomutase. But then from glucose 6-phosphate, I'll just move this out of the way, to glucose, we have the enzyme glucose 6-phosphatase. And this can only occur in the liver. So we can only produce glucose in the liver, but we can break down glucose in the skeletal muscle, the liver, pancreas, and red blood cells. However, we can only produce glucose in the liver, and that's a pretty important thing to note. And that's glycogenesis and glycogenolysis.